welcome to another episode of Side Part. I'm Nikki, your host, and today I'm so excited to have Jess from the Lost Books of Jess here on the podcast. Today we're going to chat about One Dark Window, and I'm so excited to unpack this with her because she provides top-tier book recaps, and honestly is just the funniest person I have on my Bookstagram right now. Jess, welcome!
Hi, Nikki. Thank you so much for having me.
I have to admit, when I DM'd you to come on the podcast, it was after one of your Crescent City, like unpacking Law and Order reels. I'm like, I have to have her on here. She is hilarious.
Crescent City has made me feral. Like, I don't even know who I am anymore trying to get to the bottom of that. So luckily, that's not what we're talking about.
But like, full disclosure, when you finish the third book, I'd love to have you back on to unpack all of your thoughts because we need them in long format.
Maybe at that point I'll be like regrouped.
After you have some processing time. I think you need some time and space, but when you're ready, you let me know.
I'm in. I'm in.
Yeah, let's do it. Before we get started, I always like to do this. I think it'd be really fun to kind of tell us how you got here, how you got started on Bookstagram, what brought you here today.
Okay. My Bookstagram journey started this past winter, and it really started from a place I was having kind of like a little bit of a tough time in my own, like outside of the internet life. And I was like, I need something really fun to be doing. And I was like, how can I manifest these fun things somewhere else, like a hobby for me? And I had done other forms of social media in the past. I did TikTok in the pandemic when everybody was on TikTok and and other things. I was like, what if I did Bookstagram? What if I talked about books? That's something I'm really passionate about. And it really snowballed from there. My Bookstagram was not initially these book reactions that I'm doing now. But as you probably know from being on Bookstagram, you start one place and then you realize what's fun to you or what your community connects with. And now apparently I'm someone who reads and just tells people what I'm thinking about. And that's really kind of how I got here to this place where I'm unpacking books with other people online.
That is so cool. I honestly resonate with your journey and your story so much. I feel like I started on Bookstagram when I was in this place of like, okay, I'm have 2 under 2. I'm exhausted. I don't have a hobby. I feel like I'm just so bogged down by life. And it came at a time when I was like, I need something that's manageable. I feel like I've made it a little bit like more chaotic than it needs to be, but nonetheless, I'm enjoying myself, having a good time doing it. So that's awesome.
Yeah, it's funny because I feel like I'm in like the next stage of motherhood from you, where my son is about to turn 7 and he's like not needing me every minute of every day. And then I'm like, oh, but what do I do, outside of that? And so it's been fun to pick up other things to do. So I think you'll see that as well as you continue mothering your little ones. So
it's funny you mention that because I just had, I don't know if you read Trial of the Sun King, but I had Nisha Tooley on the podcast and she was telling me how she didn't start writing until later in her life after her kids were out of like the toddler needing her 24/7 stage. And I had like this big guilt trip moment, like I should be doing more. I need to be writing the book I want to write and do all these things. And it's like there's a time and a place for everything in life. And I feel like I'm at max capacity right now, just having a Bookstagram and a podcast. I don't think I can do more, and that's okay. So
and hobbies come and go and come back around, and you find time at different places. And like, I don't think like I am more power to you doing this with small children. Like, I don't think I could have done what I'm doing now 3 or 4 years ago. So it's just different for everyone.
Well, I was always like a really work-driven person. I was a school counselor. I was really found a lot of pride in working. And I felt like when I became a stay-at-home mom, I still had that like desire to like use this skill set that I had, but I didn't want to go back to work. There was like, we really need me to be like that sole caretaker in our family. And so my husband's like, okay, you seem to want to do like the Bookstagram stuff and like you want to get a podcast up and going. And if that's going to fill your cup, putting a couple hours in a week to something, then let's make it happen. And so he bears the weight of entertaining our toddlers while I do these things. But I feel like it fuels me to like get through the rest of the week because I have this pocket of time for me,
Yeah. That's awesome. That's really great that he saw that in you and saw that this could really benefit you. And that's what my husband and son are playing Uno on the deck right now so that we can talk without them in the background.
That's okay. That's like a Hallmark moment. I'm like, how I can't wait till we have those days where it's like just sitting by a fire or bonfire
Mhm.
playing some cards. Like, so nice.
It is fun. Yeah.
So let's get into it. Today
All
we're going to
right.
chat about One Dark Window, book one of the Shepherd King series. I hope I don't mess this name up, by Rachel Gillig. I
I
think
think
that's
that's
how you say it.
correct.
All right.
Or we're
As you'll
both going
find, I
down.
too struggle with names. Everyone in this book, I'm probably going to say their
I
names
know.
wrong.
I like how I confidently was like, good job, Nikki, pronouncing things. When if anyone listening to this knows me at on Bookstagram at all, I'm the last person you should trust.
You know, the Chol got me. I'm not going to lie. When you pronounce KL Chol, I was like, all right. I
Listen,
don't think I've heard
I,
that one yet, but I'm down.
I did what I did and I committed. But these names, we're getting these right, Nikki. I feel it.
Dear, I hope so. But if we don't, nobody come at us and tell us, because I just need to live in my little Delula world. I don't have
Yes.
much left. Let me have my mispronunciations, you know?
Yeah.
So this book chat's gonna be divided into two segments. So we're gonna start off with a non-spoilery section, and then we'll make it very clear when we're gonna talk about the entire book one. We're gonna try to stay away from book two. Some spoilers might seep in, so just be well aware. So did you want to start, Jess, or do you want me to start with our non-spoilery thoughts? I don't know if you got anything ready to go.
I mean, sure, I'll start with one of them. I mean, I think one of my favorite things about this book as a fantasy reader is, and I don't know if you thought this too, Nikki, but I love that this book had gothic vibes almost instead of that more traditional,
Yes.
like Throne of Glass medieval vibes. Like, not that the characters didn't like ride horses and have swords, but it was like spooky. If that
Have you
makes,
read
I loved
Belladonna
that.
by chance, or Foxglove?
I have not, but they're on my list because I keep seeing them
Yeah.
everywhere.
So they were not the same, but there was those elements of like a gothic fantasy that I ate up.
Mhm.
Like, absolutely loved like this earthy, dark, not quite like we're in like the Renaissance or something, but truly
Yes.
like it really blurred a lot of the elements that I love from different novels, and it was unique in its own right, for sure.
Yeah, I talked to a lot of people and we're like, ooh, this duology is a reread in October, like near Halloween, because it just gives off that feeling.
100%. And I also think there was like also an air of mystery, which is why I
Mhm.
think it reminded me of Belladonna so much. And I wouldn't say it's like a heavy like who done it, but there was definitely this air of like, I want to know what's going on. We're trying to uncover things, we're trying to find things. And I wouldn't say like a traditional mystery at all, but I always
Mm.
love when that's like a plot driving device.
Yeah, and I love, like, I feel like the characters almost had like a heist, which I think goes with the mystery part, like this mission they're trying to accomplish and they're trying to get around other people to accomplish it. And I thought that was really fun to read, like trying to figure out how are they going to do this and not get caught.
Yeah, like almost like an Ocean's 11 vibe, right?
Yeah.
It's like Ocean's 11 with fantasy and gothic vibes. Like, I'm in. This is awesome. Like,
I was hook, line, and sinker. Well, after the first, like the beginning, I was like so struggling with, it's just such a unique magic system with the cards and everything. And so at first I had to like readjust to that. But as soon as I hit like chapter 4 or 5, gone. I was sold.
you know, I don't think this is a spoilery thing because I feel like you learn about the cards very early on. But there is a point, I want to say it was around like page 35. I was like, is this really a book about collecting cards?
It was kind of like Pokemon.
Yeah, gotta catch them all, right? I'm like, what am I reading? Like, I really have never read a book, and maybe I'm not gonna even pretend I'm the most well-versed in fantasy, but I have yet to read a book that the whole magic system kind of was ingrained with this idea of the usage of cards to be like the main source of magic. It was interesting. I don't know if you're an X-Men fan, but like, I know Gambit just throws cards, but it definitely like brought me back to like, I'm like, wait, what? I'm so lost. I got poker vibes. I don't know. It just, nothing made sense in the beginning. It was very
Yeah, and I just
confusing.
thought it was unique, and I don't think this is spoiler either. I agree with you because I feel like it's like right in that beginning
Mhm.
part of the book. I thought it was so interesting that really none of the characters were inherently magical. right? Like on their own. They either had encountered the situation in the woods, which I'll be glossy about, or they have these cards that provide them with the opportunity to do magic. And I feel like that led to a different power dynamic than we see in other books, because it was like the haves and the have nots in a different way, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And I think like this idea of magic was something that happened to people. It wasn't something inherent. So I feel like in a lot of
Hmm.
fantasy books, there is this idea that there's certain people that are born with magic.
Hmm.
It's not necessarily come upon, or it's rare to come upon. And this kind of, I think you're right when you say it was just really hard at first to wrap my brain around the magic system in this book. And okay, I don't know if you're like this, but when people used to talk about magic systems and like, oh, this is a really cool magic system, I didn't really know what that meant as a
No.
term. Like, what does that mean? I will say this book helped me understand more when a magic system is different. Like, it's like what the idea of magic is built upon.
Hmm.
And it was weird at first, but I loved it at the end. Like, by the end of the first book, I was like, this is awesome. I'm down. I'm in.
Oh, it
I'm
was
invested.
totally awesome. And like again, not like, I know we're in like a non-spoiler zone right now, but the way it plays out in book 2, then like once you have all that knowledge and the characters have to continue what they are in the middle of at the end of book 1, you're like, oh, your brain will explode. It's so good.
Oh, and did you like the dialogue in this book? I thought it was well written. I love when people have like sarcastic or witty or like really
Mhm.
fast paced dialogue. I ate it up. I thought it was so well written.
I agree completely, and I think that the cherry on the top of the dialogue for me was how poetic some of the language was, like the fact that Nightmare speaks in rhymes, and then there's all these little poems. Again, I hope this isn't spoilery, but like at the top of each chapter, there are those like little poems that start the chapter. Like I think there was so much woven into the way the story was written that was a little bit lyrical almost. And then, like you said, the sarcasm and the banter, and that was still all there. It was just really good.
I think you're 100% right. So there is this character that we meet really early on. And he is very poetic, but there's times where he steps outside that poeticism and just has these
Hmm.
really blunt, sarcastic remarks that are so well
Hmm.
timed. At least in my brain, the way I've read them, they're well timed. And
I
I just
agree.
thought it was so interesting how the author will use poetry in moments to like just draw you into the chapter and kind of set the scene for what to expect. But then there's
Hmm.
these other times where she has almost like this colloquial kind of sarcasm that gets
Hmm.
interjected in the story. And I'm like, that's hilarious. Like, I was not expecting that out of this person's mouth.
Oh, I know. And the character you're talking about, like when he served it up, he served it up. Like he came in full on with that sarcasm every time.
Well, let's jump into the spoilery section now because I
Okay.
want to talk about this a little bit more, but like just say what we're saying and,
Yeah.
say it with your chest. Okay. Nightmare was hilarious. I
Oh,
hated him at first. So when you first meet Nightmare, I feel like he creeped me out
oh.
heavily. This
I,
idea of like this thing in the back of your mind with yellow eyes, not quite a man, not quite a creature. I was like, I don't know if this book is for me. I feel like this person has either mental illness or like, well, you have another theory about what he could have been.
I was unwell about Nightmare because I agree with you. I started at like, this is not cool. Like Elsbeth, our main character, is like 20, right? I think. And Nightmare has been
Yes.
living in her brain for 11 years. And he is this, what we presume at the beginning of the book, a just dark entity that she touched the Nightmare card and he like leached onto her brain, right? Creepy. So creepy. But then, Nikki, I got to be real with you. I hit a point in the book where I was like, is Nightmare our morally gray male main character? Are Elsbeth and Nightmare in love? Is this my first book where the lovers are in the same physical body and I lost it? Like I was like, I'm not okay.
So I think, okay, there is this scene where Elspeth makes it very clear she has not dreamed since Nightmare has entered her brain.
Hmm.
One night when she's sleeping, I forget which, it's relatively early, right around page 100 maybe.
Hmm.
She has this dream about the knight with the golden eyes in the room with the one dark window before she even goes to the U estate. And at that moment, I was like, oh, okay, it's the Shepherd King, right? Because there's other like mentions of him. And I kind of, that was my first inclination. I'm like, I think this is the Shepherd Queen King. But you
No,
were, you
no.
thought it was her mate. And honestly, that
Oh.
could track in the sense of, in a lot of other fantasy novels, mates can mind speak. So is her
Mhm.
mate just firmly living in her brain till they can meet
Oh.
up? I don't know.
I
Maybe.
was going to be so mad. I was like, I can't do it. But I mean, I accept it if that was the journey we were going to go on. But then I agree with you. I remember I did not pick up that dream as a hint that he was the Shepherd King. Like I lived in my blissful ignorance of who the Shepherd King was. But as soon as we really met Raven, I was like, ooh, this is the love interest. Like my fantasy reader kicked in and I was like, no, forget you, Nightmare. Raven is here now. So
I loved when they first met. Like it was
yeah.
the perfect first chance or the first time meeting, right? Emery, who happens to be Raven's younger brother, who we find out later is infected, has her like in a compromising position, and he like rescues her. And then later you find out he's like this scrawny dude that she probably could have pushed off by herself.
Yeah, oh yeah.
But I really love that she made him the captain of, is it Destroyers? Am I pronouncing that right?
Oh boy. Here we go
We're
down
gonna
the
call
rabbit
them
hole together. I was saying
Destroyers.
Destriers.
Destroyers.
Destriers.
We'll go with that.
Well,
Destroyers.
because the whole book, there's the whole theme of trees. So I think I was trying to put the word tree in it. Destriers. I don't know.
I mean, it's very paganistic in a way, the way they like really worship trees. Because like they don't say gods in this book, they say trees. Like, like, oh my trees, or things of that nature. So I thought that was really interesting.
It is. It is. I love, and that continues again, like to be woven into book 2. Like, I guess for everyone who's listening to this who's read book 1 but not book 2, I'm over here like, pay attention to the trees. Like the trees continue to be like a whole bag of chips, which I just think is really, really cool though.
How do you know that you lived in the 90s without knowing? You're all that in a bag of chips. I say that to this day.
Yeah,
I still do.
Me too.
I'll never let it go. And my side part is here to stay forever. So.
Yes. Don't you let it go, Nikki.
I honestly, my face is not proportional. It looks better. I offset with the side part. It's here forever. So when you're in the very beginning and you first meet, is it Ione? I'm going to ask you what your pronunciation is for every name.
Okay, so my pronunciation is Ione, but I have been told by the people of the internet that I am incorrect, but I don't remember how they told me to say it. To me, it's Ione.
How else would you say it?
I think it's Ione. I think it might be Ione. Like, I think there might be an extra, I don't know.
Okay, for the sake of this podcast, if we are pronouncing it wrong, I am very sorry, but I have to say Ione because that's how my brain said it. So I'm sorry.
Nikki's sorry, but I'm not. So there you go.
When we first meet her, I generally was like, I think I'm going to love this character. And then she gets the maiden card. I know I only read the first book, but I still do not understand why she doesn't carry it with her. And do you think that Hoth made her use it and then took it away from her so she couldn't release the grips of its magic? Or do you know already?
I know a lot of things.
Okay.
Because like the thing I'm willing to say here is Ione plays a major role in the second book. Like she is involved, her situation, and you wondering about this is a great thing to be wondering. I
feel like you're my teacher, like, very good. Knowing all the answers.
Can I tell you, like, I'm realizing what happens now when I post about things like Crescent City and people are like, good job, Jess, keep going. Like, you know,
oh my God, there was a few moments after when you're reading the second book, I'm like, I like A for effort, but
yeah.
No.
Here's what I will say. You are right to find that situation very fishy. Like the maiden card is a fishy concept, and Houth proved himself in this book to be a dirtbag. So, I mean, like when you're putting those pieces together, you are very right to be like, wait a minute, what is happening?
Well, and So this is where I get a little bit confused about the magic system. So let's go back to that. The
Okay.
cards, I highlighted this one specific section. I think is it 72 cards, like a full deck, right?
Oh boy, that
I
sounds
have it in
right.
my
It's like a
notes
lot.
somewhere.
Yeah.
There's a lot of cards. And I know we talked before we started recording. You're like, okay, it gets explained. But I remember so many moments when I'm like reading this book and I could not keep count or track of like, there
Mm-mm.
just seemed to be hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of cards floating around this
Mhm.
book. But yet there's only 72. And I know they're at court and things like that where a lot of cards will be out. But 72 people is not that many to have cards. And some of them have two. I was confused nonetheless. Sorry for the rant.
No, and there's an element, and I double checked that this is part of the first book. There's then the element that you don't need all 70 some of them. You need one of each to make a complete set to break the curse. And
You
that
need
adds
12. Yeah.
yeah. And the 12 has to be one of each one, like not just 12 assorted cards.
Well, and
Um
is it it's like there's 13 of one or no, 12 of one, 11 of another type of card, and then like descending order. So there's only
I think
one of the last card, the twin
the
alders.
twin
I believe.
alders, yeah. I think the highest one is 13 because that's the black horse card that the
Yes.
Destriers have, and there's like distinctly 13 of the like King's Guard, and then it goes down from there. And like Nightmare, there's only 2 of them, so on and so forth.
And I think you mentioned, though, in the next book, it gets explained a little bit more in depth. But I feel like that to me was one of the most off-putting parts about the story in the beginning was keeping track of like this moving pieces of like the cards. And there is a little bit of info. I don't want to say info dumping, but a lot of explanation behind it with not a lot of context. And I feel like that to me was a little bit confusing. But as the story moves forward, I feel like you catch on pretty quickly.
Oh, yeah. And I think you start to realize you don't have to track them all because the story is going to track what you need. Like the author, Rachel, did a fantastic job of reminding about a card if it was going to pop back up again. And she continues to do that in the second book. Like there was never a point where I was like, I feel like I need all of them written down in front of me, and memorize them or something. Although people have made really good guides. They're floating around out there about all the cards. So.
When I feel like there's a lot of moments where they end up in situations with a specific card, whether it's the nightmare card and someone's trying to like read their brain, or the chalice card and they're caught in this not truth or dare, just straight up truth circle, and it's really uncomfortable. But you kind of get put in these situations with these cards, and you very quickly, I feel like I have a really good understanding of like the functionality of a lot of these cards because you're, as the reader, put in these situations. So if in the beginning you're overwhelmed, just know it's kind of like at the beginning of Crescent City, right? Like just keep moving. The pieces get reminded and popped back in throughout. So just kind of ignore it. Keep trudging through. Don't try to make too much sense of it in the beginning. You'll be fine.
Oh, I am so glad you brought up the chalice card and that absolutely wild truth game.
It's towards the end, and I remember sitting, I'm like, oh, what?
Yeah, I was like, how is this? And they reference like, oh, we did this when we were kids all the time. We would make each other drink the chalice truth liquid serum.
Truth juice.
And then, whatever. And then we would take turns asking each other questions. I'm like, oof, that is a weird childhood. That is, guys.
Well, and that circle was a very pivotal moment because I feel like they characterize Hoth as like kind of a bumbling idiot up to this point, a brute, but not necessarily intelligent. And this is the moment we really know that he suspects him fully. He's very much kind of has their number. And I think that's really where we're also shown. I mean, we knew that Raven obviously cared about as Elspeth. I can't. Elspeth. I can't.
Yeah.
Do you say Elsbeth? I can't say Elspeth.
Oh my gosh, the amount of clarification I ask from people, and apparently Elsbeth is pronounced like it is a B, like you're just supposed to roll right through it.
We're gonna do that because Elspeth is not.
No.
So Elsbeth, I feel like that is the moment where we really know that she loves Raven. I feel like we know he is obsessed with her from there's like there's a specific scene where he has like the hand flex Mr. Darcy moment, right, where it's like like when they're like, you must pretend to court her, and I think his hand literally flexes or something with strain. He's like stressed out, and you're like, oh yeah, he's got it bad. But during that truth circle, we really know that she loves him and cares about him, but you also have this foreboding feeling, wow, like shit's gonna hit the fan.
Oh, and it hits hard because of what you said, like Houth is not the dum-dum that everybody thought that he was. I mean, he's putting the pieces together, right? Because I mean, we kind of fast forwarded to here, but we have those scenes like, because Elsbeth Nightmare gives her the ability to be stronger, right? Like he can kind of take over her body and attack people on her behalf. And Houth, of course, like when he got attacked and kind of started to think it was Elsbeth, he's like, well, she does not have the physical ability to shred me, or she took down that other Destreer in that other situation in the woods as well. And so it kind of makes sense in the end that he was so on to them, but we're so busy not viewing him that way that he almost takes us by surprise. Like I was very shocked when he had this whole plan to crack them open.
I didn't really peg him as being like one of the main enemies in the novel. I knew he was going to be a brute and maybe an inconvenience because he was betrothed to Ione, but I really thought it was either going to be the king or her dad or someone, maybe even her uncle. But I was actually quite surprised that he was like the ending conflict that kind of left the book in this turmoil. Like I really didn't think he was going to be that big of a player. So that was surprising to me, actually.
No, I'm with you there. I even like commented at one point while reading it that I was still waiting to know who the big bad guy was. Like, because when you're reading books like this, you want to know who is the enemy, like who is the person who's really going to take this down. And I think at the end of book 1, Houth starts to feel that way, but there's still a lot more coming, right? Like, and I think he just ends up, you're like, wow, he was worse than I thought. Like, I was surprised.
Well, in some ways, because there was such of a lack of a bad guy, I'm sitting there like, is Elsbeth the bad guy? Is Nightmare and Elsbeth the main villain in this story? And you don't know. And so I feel like you're ending book 1 kind of feeling like the female main character is also the villain and the potentially the hero in the story. You don't know. It's very much a morally gray female main character, which we're always standing the male main characters, but I don't know. She was definitely more of a cold female main character, like rightfully so. I mean, she's had to live her life in secret and keep all these things very much inside and hide from persecution, right? Like she had to make sure she lived a low profile. And I remember there was this scene with Ione towards the end where she's like, you don't want power because you've never craved it, or basically calling her out for not wanting to be more. And she says, but I've always wanted to be like you. And it was just, that to me was like kind of like a soul crushing moment. I was not expecting that. It was sad.
Yeah, no, Elsbeth's character is so hard to think about almost because you don't know how much you should separate her and Nightmare, right? Because she still has the ability to make her own decisions, but she also has the ability to let him take over some, and he's chirping in her ear all the time. And she, I think, is so deflated by the time we meet her, and she just so badly doesn't want to get caught and wants to stay safe that she doesn't know how much to lie, how much to tell the truth, if she should get close to people or not get close to people. And then again, coming back to this chalice card scene, that's where I feel like that all just crashes for her, because I mean, my other big pivotal moment was when she let Raven into her head and Raven met Nightmare.
Yes. Oh my gosh. Well, okay, that's like there's a dual point about that, because I also think Nightmare makes a comment in there, like kind of a chide at Raven, if you will, like finally you're letting yourself in with consent, essentially. Because say what you will about Nightmare, it's kind of a really crappy situation, but he always gets Elsbeth's consent before he takes over, which I thought was an interesting concept because he's there without her permission. But he has never taken over her body without her saying, just do it, help me, save me. Like he only answers her call when she asks for it, where he kind of, I don't know, made a remark at Raven, like kind of, telling him you should have asked permission before this. Finally, you waited for her to say it was okay.
Oh
I
my
thought it
gosh,
was interesting.
he dug at Raven so hard. Like that scene where she was knocked out because the chalice serum can poison you
Yes.
also, and she's unconscious. Do you remember that whole scene where Raven and Nightmare just argue in her head without her?
Mm-hmm.
And
that to me was a really interesting moment where we almost see like Nightmare become a protective person. Like, and okay, here's the other thing. I, by the end of the novel, got the feeling that like he was sad. And there's this point at the very end where she's asking for Nightmare's help. And he's like, you're so close to being completely, I don't remember the exact term. Is it devolved or
degenerated? We didn't talk about this yet.
And he's like, don't let me do this. Like, you're basically at the end. I don't know if you come back from this. And she's like, just do it. And to me, that moment, I was like, he really doesn't want this for her, but also he's himself and he's sarcastic and comes off very much so.
Oh, I know. And that moment was, that whole scene was so heartbreaking because then we continue to get to the core of Elsbeth's character. Yeah, well, and we find out she really cares for Raven because ultimately she let Nightmare finish her degeneration to protect Raven and them from looking like they were part of anything. Like she just wanted to look like the guilty one so that they could carry on, and was willing to completely give up herself to Nightmare to just let that happen. Woo!
And then at the end, when he's bartering with the king and he's like, I'm the only one that can find you the twin alders. I don't know, because obviously I didn't read the second book yet, which I have to read tonight now because I'm just so invested.
I'm dying to know what you think about that ending, though. Like, this is the moment I've been waiting for.
In your DMs, don't worry. But there's this moment where he tells the king, like, I'm the only one that can find the twin altars card for you. But I think it was more letting Raven know, like, I know where it's at and I'm going to help you find it. Because I really do believe Nightmare is invested in this quest to lift the curse. Because I think he wants to be free. But obviously, this is all just me kind of thinking about what book 2 is going to be about. But judging from your responses, I think there's a lot more at play than I'm aware of for book 2.
Here's what I'll say. I went back and like, here's like what a straight A student I am preparing for this podcast, Nikki. I went back and also watched my own reels and I was like, where was I? Like, what headspace was I in when I finished book 1? And I'm going to quote myself like a nerd, but I said something like, Nightmare is pulling an Aelin. He has a plan that nobody else is aware of, that he is setting into motion, and we are just finding out as he is willing to show us. And that's all I gotta say. Nightmare has a plan. That's it.
I love that you just compared Nightmare to Aelin, because this is the most, like, I would have never made this association, but 100% Nightmare gives me Aelin vibes.
Yeah,
I think he's gonna, oh no, I don't know what certain characters just give me vibes, and that's the vibe. You just nailed it.
Well, Nightmare, not Nightmare. Aelin is my pinnacle of like, she is now the name I use when a character makes plans with no one's consent. I mean, I know Nightmare did consent with Elsbeth, like you brought up a minute ago, but like
to take over her body. But as far as what he has planned, he's a horrible communicator in that respect. No, and I will say, not to. I hate criticizing Aelin because I feel like people get a little bit testy about this, but she struggled in that respect. There's a lot of times a lot of things could have been solved had she just said, hey, by the way.
Yep. I'm with you on the not going down that rabbit hole now because
but we could.
I'm also
I just
in
feel
that
like
fight with Bryce.
I know.
Yeah.
You know what, though? To be fair, books would be a lot shorter if there wasn't miscommunication or lack thereof. Yep. It makes for an interesting plot. It's really cool when things come together, when a lot of things weren't communicated properly. So it's a good story.
Nikki, he lived in her brain for 11 years and did not tell her who he was. That's the part I can't let go of. I'm like, you lived there.
How do you take up residence in somebody's brain and just exist as like this foul creature? And then 11 years later, you're like, oh, by the way, I'm this 500-year-old shepherd king without a name, and I'm here to seek vengeance.
Yeah. So we're
Now
we're
you
not giving
now you
Nightmare any
tell me.
communicator awards. None for him.
I will say though, some of my favorite characters, like you said, like Aelin, um, honestly, are just really poor communicators. So maybe that says something about me as a person. And maybe the fact that I love Nightmare, in spite of his really poor communication. Actually, this is just saying something about me as a person. I think we can move on because um okay, this idea of the infected
Mhm.
I thought was really interesting. So we have like this card system, but have we really unpacked like we obviously talked about Nightmare because she was infected
Mhm.
from the mist? Like is it the mist that this is what I kind of didn't understand. Is it the mist that infects them or they just come down with this infection because the spirit of the wood infects them?
No, it's if you spend oh boy, I hope okay, this is going to be murky and I'm sorry if this is
It
book
was
2,
murky and
but
I
it's
just read it, so take a
if
shot at it.
you spend too much time in the mist in the woods, you
Even
get
with your like
infected.
token.
No, the token is what but if you go into the mist without a totem or token of some kind, you get infected. What infected is really murky because it seems to give you a piece of magic that then the king doesn't want people to have. And my take on that was it's uncontrollable magic. Like the
Yeah.
cards are a highly controllable item, whereas now this is magic that's part of your person. But if you remember the scene where Houth goes kind of rogue and he's going to send that child's parents into the mist as a punishment, because you can also get lost in the mist and
And
never
they couldn't
return.
find them.
Right.
Okay.
So I think the magic from the cards and the magic infection from the mist are two separate things that both exist because of the Shepherd King. And what you're going to learn more about in book 2, like how that
Okay.
all happened.
Well, and the idea though, like, is everybody degenerating that gets infected? Like every single, like it's not. There's not one thing I've read so far. It seems like that whoever has been infected is not degenerating in some way, but some seem more deadly than others.
Yes, I
Okay.
also understood it that way, that was truly a side effect of being infected.
And what's with the salt? Like they get like this extreme smell of salt whenever the spirit of the wood is near or they're in the mist. And are they by like you know what I'm talking about? Like there's just like, a
Yeah.
lot of mention of like salt filling nostrils.
I don't remember now if that
Okay.
continues to be important, but have you noticed that pops up in other books related to magic, like the salts in Crescent City? Mm,
Okay, so that's where my brain went and I don't
yeah.
are you in the third book?
Yeah, so I know
There's a
what
lot of
salt
time
can
dedicated to
do.
different types of salts.
Right. And the
Yeah.
salt merchant at the meat market, like not to give spoilers for Crescent City, but it's a whole thing, right?
Yeah. I don't know if it's because I'm still coming off of like the mass verse and obviously Crescent City, but I'm like, I feel like this is significant. The smell of salt and so you're saying you don't remember it being that
I
important.
think
I'm
it
just
continues No, I think it continues to pop up as a sign that magic is present, but I can't remember if it goes further, like has a deeper meaning than other than magic, a signal of magic.
okay. That I guess that makes sense. I feel like I'm also thinking of Supernatural, like how they always like make salt rings. So I guess it's just maybe something that's commonly associated with magic, but I'm just I get a little bit weird when I have to do a book chat and I'm like highlighting anything that could be
Oh
important. I'm
yeah.
like I might just be looking into things a little that have no meaning beyond that it just smells like salt. So cool. um the whole courting situation, what are your thoughts on that? Like the fake dating trope mixed within a fantasy novel and
Oh,
I don't know.
the fake dating trope. Okay, so while we're here, the fake dating trope is one of my favorite ones. I'm going to be completely honest. It's the one that makes me kick my feet and giggle because I just know it's
Yes.
going to make both characters so uncomfortable. And I kind of think it's hilarious.
My notes
And
literally on my Kindle were yes. Like I like it's so one bed, one in the inn, one room left. That
oh, yeah.
one bed tropes it, but like fake dating gets me every time.
And I love how this one like escalated further to like they needed it as a reason for her to go live with him. And I'm like, okay, we're moving in. We are courting and we are moving to Castle U. Whoa.
I I loved it. Like
Yeah.
I'm getting giddy and blushing talking about it. I was so excited that this was like part of the book.
Yeah.
Like so excited. I also thought it was interesting, and I think this is just me kind of going towards like a Regency romance Bridgerton vibe, but they could be affectionate in public and she could just go wherever unescorted. That I thought was interesting in this
Mhm.
book. Like he could just kiss her and like whisper sweet nothings in her ear, and like I was like, is no one gonna talk about this? Is you know what I mean? I think I'm
Oh,
too.
yeah. Yeah, it was interesting, and again, I don't know, I feel like that is such a difference between, like, Raven courting someone, and I feel like the times we see Houth and Ione together, it's a totally different but, like, a much more formal
Mm-hmm.
vibe, like what you're describing, and I thought it was such a neat plot device because the characters needed more physical proximity to go after the cards. Like Raven literally needed Elsbeth's gift to see the cards, and
And like
what
get
a better
access to her. Yeah.
yeah, and what a better excuse to be around someone at all times than we're probably going to get married, so let's hang out.
I ate it up. Like this
Oh,
is
me too.
actually, I remember the exact moment they decided to do this like fake dating, like courting trope. I was like, I'm in 100% devouring the rest of this book. You
No, and
got
it
me.
was so cool though how, like, from reading other fantasy books where romance plays a role, it was so cool though how I feel like this book still gave Throne of Glass vibes where the fantasy part was heavier than the romance, but the romance was such a fun piece. Whereas other books, the romance takes precedent sometimes over the fantasy. And it was fun to watch how this author chose to play that out, I think.
I think that's why I loved it so much, because it did remind me of Throne of Glass in that respect. Not in like this epic,
Yeah.
like 7 or 8 book, like fantasy series, but more in the respect of it was very plot heavy, very fantasy heavy.
Hmm.
And like you said, like the romance was almost a subplot, but also the female main character knew there was an end. It was never going to happen if they couldn't solve this mystery. So
Hmm.
really, finding the cards took precedence over everything.
Yes.
It was just like a nice little bonus within the story.
Yeah.
I thought was so interesting.
And I thought it was funny how every character could take part in the goal, if that makes sense. Like they all want to end this curse, right? But Raven's perspective is he wants to save his brother Emery because the king was going to use Emery's blood to break the curse, because you need an infected person's blood. Whereas Elsbeth is more excited, I think, to lose Nightmare if the curse breaks. So it's like every player had a different stake. There's the word I was searching for. Like they all had something important to them. I thought that was really neat.
You bring up an interesting point, because I think the believability came in because Raven obviously wanted to save his brother, but the buy-in couldn't be that Elsbeth wanted to save his brother too. And not that she wouldn't have cared, because she does seem like she cared about the boy and his parents and rescuing the boy. So she does, obviously we see she has a good heart and a protective nature. But the fact that she had like that skin in the game of literally wanting to save herself just made it all the more believable that she was willing to go along with like all these kind of insane plans, like pretending to be highwaymen and risking her life. I feel like it helped make it more believable in that respect.
I did too.
So is there any final thoughts on One Dark Window before we wrap up?
I mean, my final thought is what an amazing example of a duology, because again, as someone like you, Nikki, who are at the end of book one, like what a precipice we're left on. And like what a perfect, like I love that duologies are like a bell curve where you get this like perfect, like, and then you get to ride the rest of the wave. And I just thought that Rachel Gillig nailed that. And that is my final thought, that it was just such a crisp couple of books when you don't want to read 8 or 9 books or things that are 900 pages long. I was just so impressed.
I 100% agree. I feel like my final thoughts are, if you're in the mood for fantasy but not willing to sign up for a whole series, this book, only finishing the first one, like you're exactly right. I'm standing on the precipice ready to jump into the second book, very excited. It's a quick read, it's fast, it's digestible, and I highly recommend it.
Yep.
And I really want to thank you, Jess, for coming on my podcast and chatting with me today. I truly enjoyed having you.
Yeah, anytime. I mean, you're not going to get rid of me yet because if you remember at the beginning of this episode, you said I could come back and talk about Crescent City 3. So we had a good time and
100%.
I'll be
I would
back.
love that. um, as soon as you finish, you have to let me know and we'll have you back on here in a flash because I want to know all your thoughts. I've been looking to process this with somebody. I actually read it right when it came out and I still feel like I need to process more. So
Oh, done and done.
perfect. And thank you all for listening. I am so glad you were able to watch this whole episode. And I hope you want to read One Dark Window after listening to it. Or if you already read it, please let me know your thoughts. And did we mess some things up? Were we right on point? I look forward to hearing from you. Drop your comments below and don't forget to like and subscribe. Have a great day, guys.